Hi, I'm Paul McGinnis. I'm the Global Outreach Pastor at Parker Hill Community Church in Northeast Pennsylvania. Actually, one of our campuses is in Scranton, so you've probably heard of us, thanks to Dunder Mifflin in the office. I'm also the author of Walk This Way, A Better Path to Global Engagement, and would love for you to check that out. The idea there is to mobilize the people of God to join God's work around the world, but to do that in healthy ways, to do that in ways that are going to lead to long-term impact. A little bit about myself. Truth be told, I'm terrible with directions. I didn't grow up here in the Scranton area. I grew up in New Jersey. But whether it was New Jersey or Scranton or anywhere else, I'll often go right when I should be going left. I'll often be heading north when I ought to be going south. And one thing I've noticed when I'm lost, when I'm going the wrong direction, it really doesn't matter how sincere my heart is. It doesn't matter how much I want to get to my destination. And none of that really makes a difference. If you're going the wrong direction, you're not going to end up in the right destination. It doesn't matter if your intentions are good and your motives are pure and you're really passionate about it. And I've learned that the same is true when we engage around the world. So often we're filled with good motives, we're filled with passion and energy and good ideas, but good intentions are not enough. It takes wise action to lead to lasting change. And so I just want to share 5 best practices, perhaps 5 U-turns that you may have to take, 5 U-turns that I've had to take, that'll allow us to engage around the world in ways that are truly helpful, in ways that are going to lead to a lasting global impact. The first one is this: long-term rather than short-term. That's the first best practice. Think about the long-term rather than the short-term. Now, I'm not making a contrast between, long-term missionaries instead of short-term trips. I'm a big fan of both. But whatever we engage in with our brothers and sisters around the world, we need to be asking the question, is this leading to a long-term impact, or is this just going to have a short-term impact? The best example we've come across, because I've made mistakes with this one, is the kind of stuff that we give and offer to our partners around the world. We've been partnering in Kenya since 2007 with a fantastic organization called the 410 Bridge. And early on in our relationship in Kenya, our teams were so moved with compassion, we really wanted to help, and so we would just give stuff away. We gave away our shoes, we gave away the clothes that we brought, we gave away our hats and our watches, and we were filled with compassion, and so we wanted to give. It wasn't too long before we realized that kind of giving, if it helps at all, it's a short-term impact. It may help in that very moment right there, but it's not leading to anything long-term. In fact, the long-term implications are actually pretty negative, building entitlement and jealousy and kind of stunting the growth within that community. So thankfully, our partners helped us see a long-term investment we could make. And we came alongside them as they started to build their own knitting facility. They started this micro-enterprise where they trained the women in the community to knit the school uniform sweaters that every child needs. And instead of buying those in Nairobi, now those can be made right there in the village of Karagodo. And so instead of us giving away some shirts that might last a little while and then will need to be replaced, why not invest in a knitting facility that's going to have a long-term impact? That's the difference I'm talking about. When you're tempted to give or to offer some help, ask yourself, is this going to have a long-term impact or a short-term impact? The next pivot you might need to make: do with rather than do for. Do with rather than do for. And nobody's explored this idea better than Fickert and Corbett in their unbelievable book, When Helping Hurts. You've probably read that. If not, you really should. When Helping Hurts by Brian Fickert and Steve Corbett. And they drill down on the difference between relief and development. Relief is just offering someone the help that they cannot offer themselves. Relief is just jumping in and doing for people. And that's only needed in times of crisis, in times of extreme emergency. In every other situation, we ought to be offering development. We ought to be doing with people instead of for people. We ought to involve them in their own self-development, coming alongside them and working with them. Dambisa Moyo wrote a fantastic book on her own country. The book is called Dead Aid. And she says this: the reality is that aid or relief or doing for people has only made the poor poorer and the growth slower. Aid has been and continues to be an unmitigated political, economic, and humanitarian disaster for most parts of the developing world. When we do for people what they could do for themselves, we end up enabling them, we end up crippling them, we end up stunting their own growth. And so go for the long term rather than the short term. Do with rather than do for. Third, build capacity rather than dependency. Every time you offer help to someone, you're doing one of those two things. You're either building their capacity, making them stronger and more able to do more on their own, or you're building their dependency, forcing them to stay reliant on you and stay dependent on your gifts and your offers. We've seen this in so many opportunities. We see this all over the world. Most readily, I notice it in water projects. Water projects are a fantastic idea, but the way we go about helping people find access to water makes a big difference. You see, we can, in so many cases, when we're going in and drilling the wells and doing the work, that's making people dependent on us. They're not owning the project, they're not involved in the project, and when something goes wrong or needs to be replaced, they're often just leaving that, waiting for the Westerners to come back and fix what they've done. But how much better to work with the community and with those leaders to build their capacity, help them figure out how to figure out their problems. The solutions for those problems lie within those communities. And so we need to be building their own capacity so that we can hand it off and they're stronger than when we started. You don't measure your success by what you do for others. You measure your success by what they are now able to do for themselves. So when you're offering help, be sure that you're building their capacity, not their dependency. And then the fourth idea is to empower leaders rather than meet needs. This one's a challenge because the needs scream for our attention. The needs are everywhere. We notice them everywhere we look. We notice the poverty, we notice the difficulty, we notice the lack of water or food or health care. All we see are needs. And we're tempted to quickly jump in and just start meeting needs. But what we realize, when you start meeting needs, if you're drawn to and driven by and focused on needs, you will find yourself constantly pulled towards solutions that you can never provide. Challenges that you will never be able to overcome because the needs truly are endless. And oftentimes the needs aren't really what we perceive. So why not shift that around and empower leaders? You see, this is exactly what Jesus did, isn't it? The world that he stepped into was full of needs, and he could have just tried to solve all those himself, but instead, or as well as meeting those needs, he also invites leaders to come alongside him. He empowers leaders. And that's what I'd encourage you to do when you engage in other cultures, when you engage even in your own community. Who are the leaders that God has specifically placed in that place to bring solutions to that place? Empower those leaders because they will not only find solutions to today's challenges, but tomorrow's challenges as well. Empower leaders rather than meet needs. And then the fifth best practice, the fifth U-turn you may need to take is focused rather than scattered. Focus your energy and your attention. Scattered is easy. In fact, we've created a new word for that thanks to the upcoming generation. It's slacktivism and slacktivists, right? People who are slackers and also want to be activists. See, it's so easy to like a movement or wear a t-shirt or share a post or attend a concert. All those things may have a good impact. But the trouble is we keep changing directions. We want to change the world, but we keep changing directions. And what's needed instead is a focused walk in the same direction, going deep with leaders in one community, working through all of the problems and solutions that are there in that community. Focused rather than scattered, empowering leaders rather than meeting needs, building capacity instead of creating dependency, doing with rather than doing for, and doing that for the long term rather than the short term. Those are the kind of shifts that are going to lead to long-term change. Let me finish with one story, and it's of a monkey. He's up in a tree, and the waters are rising on the river. And as the water, big rain and a flood comes in, and as the waters start to recede, he notices a fish really struggling. And wanting to help, filled with compassion, the monkey swoops down and great danger to himself. He's holding on to one branch and he reaches down as far as he can and he snatches up the fish that's struggling and he brings him up into the tree to save his life. It's a silly story. It's not original with me. It comes from Duane Elmer in his book Cross-Cultural Servanthood. But it perfectly captures what happens so often. That monkey's filled with good intentions. He really wants to help. But good intentions are not enough. What he offered to that fish wasn't helpful at all. And so instead of just having good intentions, I want to encourage you to have some wise action as well. Long-term rather than short-term. Doing with rather than doing for. Building capacity instead of creating dependency. empowering leaders rather than meeting needs, and then being focused instead of scattered. That's going to lead to long-term global change.